As soon as we reach AGI, capital is all that matters. The permanent underclass.
I don't think because we make AI, we necessarily make class stratification.
Do you think that banning the sale of specific chips to China helps the U.S.?
I think it's a good idea to then provide previous generation of chips to the generation before, because then it makes it challenging.
The Intel acquisition, 10% ownership.
Does Intel want this capital or not? Is it being forced? Like, is this socialism? Is this Maoism?
As you're looking at the Trump administration and their approach to China's AI, what would you say you disagree with in their approach, and what would you say you agree with? Reid, thank you for joining me here today.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it. So we're going to get right into the deep topic first. We're going to talk about AGI. I've been seeing more and more technologists, especially younger technologists, talk about the permanent underclass and having a certain amount of time before being consigned to the permanent underclass effectively, because AGI, as soon as we reach AGI, the capital is all that matters. Have you heard this? What do you think about it? If you agree, what can we do to prevent it? And if you disagree, why?
So I tend to think societies that don't allow genuine and fairly broad upward mobility are unstable. And, you could go to the kind of dystopia movie Elysium, where you have an upper class with a bunch of, militaristic robots.
A great movie.
Yes, exactly. Great movie, excellent Matt Damon, the whole crew.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a dystopia and would be bad. I don't think because we make AI, we necessarily make class stratification. Technology can be used for class stratification. Technology can be used against, for example, on the against it side, is if you allow upper mobility, then the fact that everyone gets an educational agent, to, like, not just the wealthy people who have educational agents today, they're called tutors,
right?
All other things,
right?
But everybody has that. Then you have much more potential educational upward mobility. So I am not worried intrinsically based on technology for a permanent underclass, for kind of a shift towards an autocratic society. I'm worried about kind of the political system in terms of getting there. And you could say, well, but the AI could actually, in fact, further destabilize our destabilized political system. And the answer is, yes, our political system is destabilized, and AI can go in a negative direction, but can also go in a positive direction. And so my view is what we should be doing, as opposed to like, hey, how do I get as much capital as possible in the 3 years, is how do we get to a political system that enshrines the kind of humanist values that we want, that is broadly, you can make progress, and that you have upward mobility and, frankly, geographic mobility for people.
Yeah. Is that going to be facilitated with AI? Do you think government should be adopting it much more quickly than they are right now? I'm wondering how we can actually achieve that.
Well, it can be facilitated. Educational tutor, one thing. I do think governments, roughly speaking, part of the reason why I wrote Super Agency earlier this year, roughly speaking, we're in a cognitive industrial revolution. Britain did not invent the Industrial Revolution, but embraced it most fully early. That led to a centuries-long empire of otherwise this kind of small island, right? Kind of as part of Europe. And I think that we as society need to do that too. And I think it's how do we make our industries, kind of AI enhanced and robust? How do we help the transitions with workers? Because, by the way, it will be lots of job transitions. It's not going to be easy. Like the whole Luddite movement in, kind of powered looms in England, that's just kind of the beginning of the kind of adoption issues that we'll have. But by the way, part of, like, when people say, well, why should I bother? Like, I'm happy with my job the way it is. Why shouldn't I just resist the use of AI and not have it? And the answer is, well, because your children, your grandchildren will be the kind of the non-industrial rural children that the other countries had. You don't want that for your children. Two, what government should be doing is saying, how do we get you the benefits of AI as much as possible? Yes, there's going to be job transition, but a medical assistant. I mean, think if everyone who has access to a smartphone has access to a, kind of better than a GP today in terms of navigating health issues, say that you get into kind of the issue of triaging what goes on with emergency rooms or other things and say, hey, I don't just have to go to an emergency room because I don't know what to do, but actually that's triage to the people whose lives need saving versus the take 2 ibuprofen and, check in again in a couple hours. That kind of thing. Those are all things, but also an education assistant, a legal assistant, et cetera. You bring those benefits to people, then they go, okay, I get it. My job is going to be in transition. That'll be scary. That'll be difficult. I'm not going to enjoy it. But I understand that that's what's important for, my family, my community.
Yeah. So I'm going to get into education and health and integrating AI into that, but I want to zoom in a little bit and let's talk about agents specifically. Agents increasingly are browsing the web on behalf of humans, but the web still is made for humans. Do you think that there are, or what are the major fundamental changes that need to be made to have the web be more agent friendly?
Well, we want the web to continue to be also very human friendly as it is, because, humans use, even as we get mediated, even as we have agents for us and agents in the other people and other organizations that we're talking to. So I think that will be that'll be important. Now, Anthropic's MCP protocol will be key, like, agents talking to agents. Yeah. So it'll be less, I think, the web per se becoming agent friendly as much as an entire new channel of communication on the internet, which will be agents talking to each other, calling APIs and services and other kinds of things. And I think we're already beginning to see some of that. Yeah. Now, of course, part of when you get to, kind of agentic mode and what you see kind of working as agents, whether it's, Anthropic, OpenAI, others, is like we're already like, part of the thing I've already started using is I go, hey, just as I use, deep research to research things, when I go, hey, I would like to get an understanding of what's going on, say, for example, in social media, like I will actually use, agentic mode in order to do that. I'll say, hey, what's trending, as opposed to the kind of call it polluted melee that is Twitter. When I want to understand stuff on Twitter, I ask the agent to give me a summary.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you brought that up because I've been thinking about this a lot. Yeah. As AI creates a kind of skewed ratio between signal and noise on the web, yes, it just seems like your agent is going to have to filter the web and provide you with information, as you said. But what does that look like if you're entrusting a single AI to essentially filter all information coming into you? Isn't there going to be this risk of inherent bias, or some of the, your founder of LinkedIn, social media went through echo chamber issues and amplification of fear and hate. Doesn't AI or an agent on your behalf filtering information from the web potentially suffer from those same issues?
Well, it can. But by the way, there's biases everywhere. There's, you have biases, I have biases. And so the way you navigate biases is by getting multiple, kind of angles and points of view. It's part of what's made the scientific method. It's part of what, the reason why, things like, understanding germ theory of disease, because we actually have multiple people reproducing experiments and so on. So what I think the most natural lazy course for people to do is to have one agent that they use. They'll have some risks from that. Does that agent make mistakes? Does that agent reflect a bias of the whatever organization you're is? Technologists talk about, well, it should be agent I'm paying, so it's responsive to me versus responsive to advertisers. I think that's going to be far more complicated because if you have human nature, people prefer free or cheaper. With advertising, it's been demonstrated for, over a century in terms of how this works. So I don't think that, I think that you have to presume that advertising is actually in fact going to be part of it. But like, for example, today, when I do deep research on something, I actually, in fact, generally speaking, do deep research, not just on ChatGPT, but also on Gemini and also Anthropic. And actually, I'll take the outputs and I'll feed the three of them into sometimes one of the models or three of the models and compare and contrast and so forth, and get some understanding of where those biases are across them as a way of operating. I think that's what's going to happen in agents too. I don't think we're just going to have one agent that says, la, 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 it's only through my one agent in the web. I think we're going to have a couple agents. And what's more, part of, I think, the people who are at the edge of learning how to use these are using the saying, hey, it's not just generic, like, like the 1.6 words I type into, pick your favorite search engine. But actually, in fact, part of what I do when I'm prompting an agent is I say, hey, when I'm looking at this, I'm particularly interested in this from a global perspective. So can you make sure that you're representing Asian, African, European, perspectives in reflection to me? And by giving it a role, you're actually prompting it to try to see around blind spots and all the rest. And I think all of that will be part of it. So actually, in fact, I think ultimately this kind of agent, this kind of trusted agent mediation should help me relative to biases from today rather than hurt me.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned publishers, or you mentioned like as agents are browsing the web on your behalf, you're not necessarily giving the eyeballs to the publisher, your human eyeballs. The monetization model might have to change. Have you had any thoughts as to what that new monetization model might look like as more agents are browsing the web?
So I've given some thought to it. What my hope is, like, I think there will be various forms of advertising, has a whole bunch of things where Google's AdWords is the current, kind of leading contender, although, Meta with its, kind of social networks is also doing quite well. And I think those two will be baseline, but I think we will invent new ones. It's like when Google launched its website, it thought it was going to be selling ads, it thought it was going to be selling enterprise services. Then it thought it was going to be doing DoubleClick, and then there was a drop in the whole advertising internet market dropped out, and it had to invent AdWords by using inspiration from Overture and other things.
Right.
I actually think there will be a unique new model that one of the leading contenders will figure out, and that will essentially create the equivalent of the Google power for how that works. And what I hope for the characteristics of that new model are that it has some of the characteristics that like AdWords had, which is, well, be clear in distinguishing what is advertising. Be clear in kind of saying, hey, here is what your participation in this advertising ecosystem does in terms of here's where your data and your agency plays into it. But my guess is there's going to be something new. And that's one of the things I've been paying attention to. One of the things I like as a investor is, you get thousands of entrepreneurs who are all thinking about this. And so I might come up with an interesting idea, but I think it's much more likely that some really interesting, bold entrepreneur will do it. I hope to see it.
Yeah, me too. I just, if it were up to me, I would just simply pay ChatGPT and they wouldn't have advertising in it. But I understand the vast majority of the world probably prefers a free product and service. So advertising makes sense. Do you foresee model providers integrating advertising into their model responses?
I think all of them will.
Yeah. There's going to be a free tier for all of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It just makes economic sense.
Okay. I want to talk about agent memory for a minute. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. It's really, it brings these models value to really an incredible level, but it also provides a moat for the model providers, right? You're building up a memory with ChatGPT. It gets better. It develops a shorthand with you. But if you want to go somewhere else, you essentially have to start over. Yeah. Do you think there's a need for kind of an open protocol like MCP, but for agent memory? Do you think, like, how much investment should companies be making into making the agent memory more portable? since it goes against what their incentives are.
It does indeed. I think that the companies will naturally basically try to make portability of memory hard. They're not going to invest in making portability of memory easy. It's the natural economic incentive. And the balance is, to some degree, it's like, well, like today, for example, there will be good, call it reasons and rationalizations, which are like, wow, but my memory format is special, and I can't, like, I don't want to export my secret sauce, by which I'm providing such amazing, kind of persuasion or engagement or creativity, and so I'll say, sure, I'll export, Reid Hoffman as a name. I'll export, kind of biographical details, kind of things. I'll export a summary of things we've talked about. Like, oh, you seem to have been doing a lot of relationship between AI and art and AI and creativity. So I'll say, and Reid really likes AI and creativity. Great, new model. You should use that as your prompt and go. And so that will happen. Then, of course, by the way, if one particular agent becomes dominant, governments will then start trying to poke it to make the memory portable. Yeah. But then the question, of course, will be, well, what do you mean by portable? Like for example, I will have gone to you and I'll have said, as an agent provider, and I'll have said, hey, would you like me to keep exact records of all of your chats, or would you like me to delete them? And you'll probably say, well, actually, I'd prefer privacy, so I'll delete them. Well, then, hey, there's nothing to port, right? We're remembering what kinds of things we have in the conversation, but there's nothing to port. Anyway, so that will be an ongoing challenge. Now, what I hope is that we already see multiple significant AI agent providers. So it's obviously like ChatGPT is the most known one, but there is Anthropic and Claude, there is Copilot, there is Gemini, there will be others, and so when you have a lot of competition and contention between them, the needs to enforce portability is somewhat less. Now, by the way, part of portability, like this is where you get to the really advanced game, is like say, well, can look, for example, what I'm doing today is I'm using two agents. Well, could one agent, help remember the things from the other? Like both agents are doing memory
by syncing all of them. It's a very difficult problem.
So and then it gets then it gets to, as that happens, then I have more ability. I already have multiple agents, and I have some portability already because I have multiple agents.
Yeah, and it seems like if you're competing with these top model companies, but you're not necessarily in first place, you're probably going to be a much bigger proponent of open standards, because it's the same thing we saw with Llama and Meta.
Yes.
Like, scorched earth, open, free.
Yes.
And so hopefully we do see that.
Yeah. We'll see some parts of it for sure because of that.
Yeah. So let's continue down the path of memory. When you think about like personal memory versus work memory, this is also something that I've thought a lot about. The agents are going to be best when they have both, when they have the context of you as a person, how you like to work, maybe even, your personal life information. And then when you bring that into a company, you're starting to develop all of the memories around the context within the company. But now we start to get into complex IP issues. Like the company is certainly going to own anything you build there. So does that mean the company is going to be less likely to want you to bring your personal agent to work? How do you see that playing out?
Well, this is a great question. I think relatively too few people are thinking about this right now. I, from my early days, 20 plus years ago with LinkedIn, I'm a huge proponent of individuals kind of in the 20 year ago, like you own your address book, whereas a company would tend to say, I own your address book because it's on my computer.
Right.
Right. And it's like, no. Individuals own their relationships, own their address book. Company might have a copy or something, but like the individuals do it. I think we're going to want to allow, freedom of economic and talent mobility. We're going to want as much, like just that history of LinkedIn, that transitivity following the individual and as much on the individual side as possible. Now that, of course, will be, have some challenges because the most expensive AI agents will generally be provisioned by the company, will be interleaved with a whole bunch of different company IP.
Right.
And so the question is, well, when I leave, what kinds of things can I take with me? Right? Because today we basically say you can't take anything that's the company IP with you. So sure.
Understandably.
Yes, understandably.
Yeah.
So what's the interface point between these two? And I go, and you already see little points of it. Like, for example, well, if I'm in a work meeting, can I have my personal note taker be taking notes? That seems to be not okay because the other people are working for the company. The question is we're doing this in a shared company space. So what will be the things that will be part of the personal space versus the company space? And I think it's a unknown as yet.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be difficult to figure out because all of these things are coming together in the same place.
Yeah.
And the companies are incentivized both to have your personal AI in the company and not to at the same time. If you're looking at a team that is using AI agents and using AI heavily, how do you tell when they're outsourcing too much of their judgment to AI, specifically within the context of the enterprise?
So part of what you need to generally kind of have people have is make sure, and this is part of the, AI work, AI work in the age of AI, is there's a lot of metacognition that we provide as human beings, even with these amazing agents today. So, and part of metacognition is the context awareness and judgment of, is this answer, does it make sense? Are there things that you're missing, right? Because the agents don't really have common sense right now. Like if they don't necessarily realize what, for example, and agents are getting better on this, but you go, hey, give me the answer to this prime number problem. And the agent gives you a bad answer and you say, nope, that's wrong. And it goes, oh, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Here's another one.
Right.
You go, nope, that's wrong. A human, by the third time, goes, okay, I'm fucking this up. I'll figure it out. The agent just keeps giving you wrong answers as they're going. And so you have to own that kind of metacognition. You have to kind of own that context awareness. And so part of what you want to be doing is you go, sure, I'm using AI to accelerate, to parse information, to work more quickly, to do a bunch of things, but I still have to own the result. And for example, when you look at good people using coding agents today, they don't just plug in the coding agent and go to town or whatever.
Right.
They look at the results, right? And they they're applying that metacognition to it. And I think, you asked, how do I check? It's like, okay, so part of what I do is say, how did you use AI in doing it? Now, if they said, I didn't use it at all, he's like, well, that's foolish, right? Because you can be greatly accelerated in how you work.
Yeah.
I push people into using AI, but then they say, oh, I use it to do a whole bunch of it. Great. How did you cross-check the work? How were you thinking about making sure the work outputs were right? And if they just said, well, I just trusted you, well, okay, you got to do more than that. Now, you could cross-check with different agents. You could say, hey, I had agent 1 produce the work. I had agent 2 cross-checking it. I asked agent 2 the following kinds of questions in terms of cross-checking it. Great. Now you're much more in the metacognition area.
Yeah. Okay. I want to move on to global competition. Obviously, let's talk about China a little bit. You've said that the AI race with China is game on. You've also said AI should remain American intelligence, both of which, yes, I agree with. Do you think that banning the sale of specific chips to China helps the U.S., or is that putting us in a position where U.S. infrastructure isn't the default, isn't the standard at that point?
So ultimately what matters is the software. So slowing down the provisioning of scale chips that matter for the training of this does help maintain something of our investment edge in the software. And so I think playing to saying, hey, we as the U.S. are going to provide less numbers of scale chips to people who we're in direct kind of geopolitical competition with.
Yeah.
And you could say China, but you could also say, well, the extreme is like Russia and all the rest. We're in competition with, and so we will, on the top leading chips, provide fewer/0. That being said, I think it's a good idea to then provide the previous generation of chips, the generation before, because then it makes it challenging for competitive chip industries to get created, right? So you want to say not the latest, but the old ones. That's okay.
Yeah, but doesn't that incentivize China to invest? I mean, they're going to do it anyways, I
Yes.
suppose, but like they're looking and they're getting previous generation chips, and
Yes.
they're thinking, okay, well, not only do I have to build the chips, I have to build the software ecosystem as well. Maybe they're going to do it either way, but it seems like if we're giving them the latest chips, they may be less inclined to do so.
Well, it's a software race, not a hardware race.
Mhm.
So, other than hardware enabling software. So, and yes, they may eventually end up creating their own. And for example, they've created some. They're exploring different chip architectures in China because of limitation. By the way, ultimately, this is one of the benefits of competition. That might be a good thing that other chip architectures come out. But I think that gives our software an edge over some number of years. Some people think the only thing that matters is the next 2 to 5 years. But if you keep that edge, that's the kind of thing that can be very helpful for the cognitive industrial revolution. So I'm in favor of that. Now, that being said, the reason it's not just block all chips is because you say, well, are they going to then go create their own leading edge chips? They're going to try. But by the way, it's harder for them to do that when they can also buy the last generation of chips.
Right.
Right. So it's like they're going to try to create that leading generation anyway. You'll hear, our chip manufacturers saying, no, we should just provide them all because that's what's good for their business. But the thing that matters is which AI software will be defining the future of human society, human work, kind of human industries. And, part of what we want as Western democracies is we want that to be our AI.
Yeah. And so then as you're looking at all of these incredible open source models coming out of China, and then you look in the US where it seems like the trend is frontier labs are going to have their frontier model closed source and then maybe previous generations open source. How do you compare and contrast those approaches? Is it more of, well, if you're trailing, you're going to do scorched earth open source as we talked about earlier? Do you think the US frontier labs posture towards kind of closed source frontier and then everything else can be open source is the right one?
I do, for a couple of reasons. So first, I thought, OpenAI's release of its 2 open models this month was epic relative to like all other open source models, including the Chinese ones. Like the OpenAI models are, I think, in many facets the best, and that's interesting and useful. Now, part of the reason I've been a proponent of large-scale proprietary models is because of alignment and safety issues. So, for example, part of what you want to do is say, hey, let's not provision the best models for cybercrime, for bioterrorism, these kinds of things, and aligning them is really important. And OpenAI has been doing that for years, investing in, kind of safety groups. By the way, Anthropic is as well, Google is as well, Microsoft is as well. And those are on a proprietary models basis. That means they work that a lot. And when OpenAI gets to open sourcing its models, it's trying to do with as much safety and alignment as it can in those open sourcing. And so that's why I think this combination, and in as much as people have any worries about regulating the front of AI, proprietary models are lead to much more easy regulatory conversations with governments. Well, the problem is once you open source a model, everybody has access to it. And that includes the criminals, that includes the rogue states, that includes the terrorists.
Right.
So you have to be careful about that. Doesn't mean like I'm pro-open. I was on the board of Mozilla for 11 years. I'm pro-open source in all kinds of different ways.
Right.
I think LinkedIn has open sourced more kind of fundamental technologies that have led to new public companies than many other companies. And so I'm very positive on it, but you have to be careful about how you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's the argument that open sourcing the models will get more eyeballs on it. And there's been a history of technology that has been open source. The more eyeballs you get, the more hardened it becomes. And so how do you counter that example? Is it, how do you counter that example?
But that's actually, for open source, that's why open source and open weights actually makes a very big difference. So for open source, that's absolutely the case. It's part of the central way that Linux and Mozilla and other folks have played to being very useful, because cybersecurity hardening is useful when you see the code and you can do stuff. The problem is when you release open weights, that doesn't kind of go back into the common pile. Even as you might discover a vulnerability with an open weights model, that doesn't necessarily help anyone else. That may only just help you. And so that kind of benefit that you get from collective open sourcing doesn't actually happen in any current configuration with open weights. And no one knows yet how to make that configuration work for open weights.
Okay. And then as you're looking at the Trump administration and their approach to China's AI and restricting chips, what would you say you disagree with in their approach, and what would you say you agree with?
Well, so what I agree with is, let's see, because it's a little bit pinning down exactly what they're doing is a little challenging because they're a little random, and there's the governance by tweet and a bunch of other things that make it hard to assess where the competent play is. But roughly speaking, let's say that they say, hey, providing the leading edge chips to China is something that we are going to continue to restrict, either entirely or in volume. That's something I agree with. That we're going to provide it broadly across the Middle East is something I think needs to be a little bit more challenging, because the question of where does that bleed to?
Right.
Because you go, great, we provide it to the Middle East. And by the way, in the modern world, it's about software. So you say, hey, we're going to build all of the biggest new data centers in the Middle East. Well, they're going to rent them to whoever, including the Chinese, right? Yeah. In terms of doing this, so you have to be much more careful about that. And I don't think they are being careful, because it's being more, kind of the question of, who's giving you the $200 million plane, that kind of thing is a way of operating. So I disagree with that sort of thing. And I also disagree that they seem to be most focused on woke AI, which is almost laughable as an issue, versus, well, no, actually the real issues are like bioterrorism, cybercrime, rogue states. Woke AI is not the most fundamental issue. Yeah. Like if AI were making woke mistakes, okay, that's easy to fix. That's not something that creates an ongoing problem. Whereas bioterrorism, cybercrime, rogue states, those are ongoing problems. And that's what I would focus on.
Yeah, and it seems, especially seeing like what happened with XAI's models, just changing a single line in a system prompt is enough to completely change the personality of these models. So it's almost like focusing on the personality of the model seems like, okay, just leave it up to the companies to decide how they want to run it. And then, of course, competition is going to see it out, and whichever model's best will win.
Yeah, it's been very entertaining to watch Grok say the biggest spreader of misinformation on Twitter is Elon. Then they put in the prompt. Then people reverse engineer the prompt and see that they put it in and say, don't answer Elon to that question. You're like, well, it's actually got the most privileged access to Twitter data, so you presume it would know.
Yeah. Okay, and then let's talk about the Intel acquisition,
Mm.
or not acquisition, but 10% ownership
Yes.
by the U.S. government. Do you agree with that? It's hard for me to see the benefit in that. Although you've been a huge proponent of onshoring chips, how do you
Yes.
see that investment helping us achieve that goal?
So the thing that I think all the way back to TARP, that's actually an underutilized place of public money is to use public money for stimulus, but to also recover it in, kind of is don't make it just an expense, make it something that you can recover the capital of. Making money from it, I don't think government needs to. But if you could say, hey, we need to stabilize the financial system. We're going to put in $100 billion to stabilize the financial system, not just giving it to banks, but having it come back out as equity when you're doing it, I think was a very good and smart play for, we can't allow the financial system to fail. So that's
Imagine if they did it with Tesla and their
yeah,
loans to Tesla, they
yes,
would own a piece of Tesla.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so it's like if you're providing public money to private companies, you should try to get at least the capital return basis. I think that's a good idea. Now, it's a little confusing to know, does Intel want this capital or not? Is it being forced? Like nationalization of industries is a socialist thing.
Yeah.
It's been entertaining to watch the critique of, is this socialism? Is this Maoism? Because actually, in fact, that is what socialism is. If you're kind of slippering the brain, it's not like wokeism is not the only socialism. It's nationalization of industries. So it should only be given as options to these companies unless it's a necessary, infrastructure. Now, I do think that we want to have good, competent efforts at building up onshoring manufacturing of chips. I think that was a mistake over the many decades as to offshoring it, as much as we have. I would like to see more competence by the administration and government doing this. So far, governance by tweet doesn't really seem to be doing it.
Is it feasible in the next few years to really onshore chip manufacturing? I mean, TSMC owns it, right? They own the vast majority of chip manufacturing. Do the economics work bringing it here in, let's say, the next 3 to 5 years?
Not without some very directed and smart governance. So, for example, in prior administrations, I had been kind of recommending, hey, can we set up partnership deals in this with Mexico and Canada for doing this?
Yeah.
I actually think that would be a very good way of doing this. Now, you might do special economic zones in places like, New Mexico or Texas or other things, and making that kind of partnership work. Now, under this administration, which seems to be trying to declare war on everyone that was our previous, friends and allies, I'm not sure that will work, right? Because, it doesn't work when you're going, hey, we're going to try to extort as much from you in a trade agreement as we can versus how do we make 1 + 1 5? And then, sure, maybe in 5, you get 2, we get 3, right? As a way of kind of playing this out. That would be the kind of way to do it. I think, because you're going to have to answer the questions around, do you have the competence in the workforce? Do you have the ability to do the cost-effective manufacturing? Do you have the technology and know-how to do this? There's a whole bunch of problems you're going to need to solve, which is going to require competence in doing this. And that's not, that's not governance by tweet.
Yeah. Well, let's continue on the topic of the economics of artificial intelligence. I don't know if you've seen this meme. It was going around X in the last few weeks, but essentially 100 million in ARR, take off the mask, $120 million Anthropic bill. And then in the third pane, take off the mask, $150 billion NVIDIA bill. Is this par for the course? Is this like analogous to Uber and VCs subsidizing Uber in the early days until they became profitable and a great company now? Or is there something else going on?
No, I think that's broadly the case. And it's one of the privileged positions that NVIDIA has, which is it can command great margins because everyone they have amongst the best chips in the business.
And CUDA, the software.
Exactly.
Yeah.
exactly, and CUDA. And yes, if you factor in hardware cost and amortization, training cost and amortization, things are being priced at below their costs.
Yeah.
But by the way, that's part of why Silicon Valley, so Silicon Valley has, kind of call it, depends a little bit on how you parse it, but I think a good parsing is like 5 million people in it, which is just a little bit bigger than Ireland, and over half NASDAQ. And part of the reason why Silicon Valley does this is because they've learned to say, hey, revenue today is not what matters. Revenue in the future is what matters. And so how do you get to strategic position for that revenue in the future? And it's especially true in network effect businesses. And that's part of the reason I wrote Blitzscaling, because that was kind of lessons from this in terms of how to play out. So like people going, whoa, that's just, like this will never be profitable. It's like, no, of course it'll be profitable. Right. But investing in that future market, because revenue in the future is what really matters, is the thing that everyone's doing intelligently.
Yeah. So this just feels normal. We're
Yes.
going to get that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, the Anthropic founder a few weeks ago, Dario, said, he talked about the white collar bloodbath coming in the next 3 to 5 years. And that quote went viral, obviously.
Bloodbath quotes always do.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. We should just put that in everything.
Yes.
Do you where do you fall on the spectrum for white collar jobs? Are you more towards the pessimist bloodbath, or are you more towards the optimist utopia? Where do you fall and why?
So I'm generally speaking more optimistic, not just, super agency, possible podcast, et cetera.
Yeah.
But also like I would be willing to take the bet that we don't have a white collar bloodbath in, even 24 months from today, let alone when he did that. That was 6 months ago. So it would be 18 months from today. That would be even an easier bet. And the reason is because I actually think we're going to be finding a lot of different forms of human amplification. Now, with that, I do think the transitions will be difficult. So I think Eric Brynjolfsson at Stanford has done some good work saying, hey, we're seeing some slowdowns in junior hiring positions for customer service jobs and software engineering jobs.
Right.
I think the software engineering jobs will get refixed because I think there's infinite demand for software engineering. But I think customer service is actually one of the ones where will be most replaced, right? And could actually, in fact, like if you said bloodbath for customer service jobs in the next 18 or 24 months, I think that's very possible. And so there's going to be a lot of job transitions. And that transition, I don't mean to sugarcoat it, that's going to be difficult. But I do think, just as we were talking about metacognition and talking about what do I see happening? I think that the notion of an individual contributor who doesn't deploy with a swarm of AI agents, that's the disappearing job.
Yeah.
Right. And so it isn't so much that the job will disappear as much as the job without AI agents, it'll be a person plus AI agents that will be doing the jobs. Well, but then there will just be fewer jobs. It's like, well, not necessarily. A lot of jobs are competitive, like my marketing against your marketing. It's competitive. And so we want to be like, if we just say, hey, we're just going to all outsource our marketing to ChatGPT, well, I would like you to outsource your marketing to ChatGPT. I'm going to use ChatGPT plus humans,
right,
and I'm going to try to win and beat, right? And there's a lot of jobs like that. And then for software engineering, for example, there's infinite demand for it. There's so much infinite demand that this is part of what I see as the future of information and knowledge work. You, even doing podcasting, are going to have a software copilot.
Yeah.
You're going to be using software, custom software for things that you're doing for your own competitive edge that you will be doing yourself. That's the reason why there's a lot of demand for it. And we're all going to have software copilots in terms of how we operate.
So I'm also an optimist, and I made this video a few months back where I talked about infinite demand. I'm so glad you mentioned that. A lot of the comments I got said, no, actually, there is not infinite demand, especially if you look at the market more broadly, maybe not parts like specifically software. When a company has hyper-productivity and there isn't infinite demand, then they're not going to be hiring as many humans. What is your counter argument to people who say there is not infinite demand?
Well, I think they're right that a company will not have, there'll be some Pareto curves even in the hyperscale companies, behind management costs and hiring, kind of new engineers. So, for example, if you said, look, I'm an Oracle, and I guarantee you that the hyperscalers will be employing 20% less software engineers than they are today. Trust me on this. And I'll go, fine. Other people are going to hire them. Right.
There's a competition aspect. That was always my argument.
Yes. And by the way, and now with vibe coding and everything else, there's going to be a lot more like essentially software for just this task. Right. That's part of where the infinite demand comes from. Because it's like, no, actually this task, like, for example, I want to create, like, for example, when you think about creativity, like creating software for CG for movies, well, it was super expensive. And so only a small number of very high-end, very big budget Hollywood films can do that. Now, like, for example, documentaries are going to have access to all of this because of vibe coding. And so there's a ton of kind of software everywhere, right? Like there's going to be like, how do we make these mics more intelligent? Like, as opposed to, we have to be exactly this distance away from the mic in order to get the sound. It's like, no, it's actually going to be having software that's going to be like, I move a little bit away and it goes, I pick it up a little bit. Right. Like there's going to be software everywhere.
Yeah. You talked about smart toothbrushes and super agency.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And there's this long curve of problems that weren't economically viable before. But when all of a sudden the productivity per human skyrockets, all of those problems become economically viable. And then also, as you build out the world, you have new problems. And there was a CEO I was speaking with a week ago who said, is the world in a perfect place? Is it perfect? Is it ideal? And if the answer is no, there are more problems. And I really liked that framing of it.
And the world's never perfect. There's always more problems.
Right. And especially when we go out to the stars and start exploring space even. Yeah. So I'm definitely an optimist like you. All right. Let's talk about companionship. You have spent a lot of time thinking about this. You have Reid AI, digital twins, AI companions like Meta's celebrity AIs, Grok's Annie and Valentine. What specifically should platforms do to make sure that these AI companions are augmenting human relationships and not replacing them?
There will always be some humans who will naturally head towards replacement, and the fact that there's some does not invalidate the overall technology. It's just like there's some human beings that will get in a car and go deliberately hit somebody, and that doesn't mean no cars for anybody, right? We try to make it so that as few humans do that, and then make it hard for using cars as weapons, etc. Similar kind of thing. There will be some individuals who will go, I'm engaging with the agent, I'm doing something like suboptimum for me, suboptimum for other people. That will happen. The fact that there is some doesn't invalidate it. Now, that being said, part of what when it says like on the macro economic, basis, there will be a set of different companies that will go, hey, I just want you to orient and talking to me and my bot and not going out being a human in society, in your community and everything else. And I want to make that happen. And that's actually, in fact, a bad thing, whether that's, the most obvious example is Twitter and Elon and, creating, kind of AI girlfriends and, kind of pornography through the agent and all the rest of this as ways of doing, which they are the leaders in terms of doing. And frankly, actually, in fact, I think what's happening is a lot of the other labs are going, well, look, if you go work there, we think you don't care about human welfare. And so we don't necessarily want to hire you to our companies.
Wow.
It's almost becoming like a litmus test is if you go work there, that means that you don't have the right human alignment values that we want to create for folks. Because, for example, you should, of course, create AI companions. AI companions can be useful for all kinds of things. And not just, hey, help me figure out this medical condition, help me figure out this legal issue, help me learn things. Of course, there's all that. But by the way, it's 11 p.m., I'm lonely, I'm unhappy. Hey, talking to the companion can be a perfectly good thing, right? It might help stabilize me. Now, you want it to be, if I'm thinking about self-harm, it says, hey, let's try to help you find people and talk about like why you shouldn't do self-harm. And so I think a broad range of AI companions is a very, very good thing, but it should be with a theory of how do you live a good, healthy, happy life? How do you connect with other people around you? How do you connect with your community? And I think that's the kind of standard that we're going to want to see.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's use your last example of like, hey, it's 11 p.m. I'm lonely. Let me
Yeah.
talk to an AI companion. It's hard for me to see the broad benefit given global population decline, loneliness epidemic, which
Yeah.
I don't, maybe it helps in the short term to have an AI companion, but it's certainly or close to certainly going to take away from human companionship. How do you kind of like align those competing incentives?
Well, so the thing you have to track, it will take away from some human companionship, but there's a lot of times where people, the reason I said 11 p.m. is a lot of times where people don't have that human companionship on tap. It's like if I'm
Yeah.
sitting in my apartment by myself, it's 11 p.m. Would I be waking you up as I call you? Will you be, what is that going to be okay? I'm not quite sure if I'm ready to do that yet, etc. A companion can fit a very good nice set. Now, part of what we did in Inflection and still does it, if you go to Inflection's Pi, personal intelligence, and say, you're my best friend. It says, no, I'm your companion. Let's talk about your friends. Have you seen your friends recently, etc. So like when you'd want that companion that you might start with Pi at 11 p.m. It goes, hey, are your friends like in a time zone? Like maybe you're on the East Coast and maybe you can call one of them who's on the West Coast and it's only 8 p.m. and make that connection. That might be helpful to you.
Yeah.
You want the agent to be doing that. Like a lot of times, like a teenager might go, oh, I have no friends. Hey, actually, in fact, maybe you do. Let's help you think about who you're on the path to friendship with, who you could be building that with, etc. That's what you want the companions to be doing. And so it's not just the, hey, look, I had my best friend, Mike or Sarah, and I'm not going to call them because I'm going to call the agent. It's like, no. You want the agent kind of say, hey, have you talked to Mike or Sarah? Like that kind of thing. And that's a useful, think of it as a set of different interface services. Those are useful interface services. That doesn't mean it won't go wrong sometimes, but you want it to go right much more often than it goes wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And but I think to the movie Her, if you saw that, right? And when you're speaking with an AI that is literally built to reflect the exact type of personality that you want, the exact type of companion you want, you might get sucked into that, and you might start foregoing the human companionship aspect. And maybe not all companies are going to be as responsible as Inflection. And so, should there be maybe governmental oversight, or like how do you think about that?
So part of the thing I advocate on regulation is to start with measuring. Like too often what happens is like, let me tell you how to design this. Like none of us know how these things are going to be designed. Even the leading experts don't know how to design it perfectly for the 5-10 year future, which is what you're looking for in kind of regulation. But you say, hey, I'd like to have a set of measurements on, is your agent, like, for example, this is one of the things you could do as a government regulatory agency today. You could say, hey, we want you to propose to us some measurements of, are your agents taking away from quality human interaction? We would like you to be running those measurements, right? And we'd like to know if those measurements are going up or going down. And if they're going up, then we're going to start engaging with what's going wrong, right? And by the way, we'll revisit every couple of years. Are these the right measurements, or should there be other measurements for this particular challenge? And once we see them starting to go up and think the measurements are real, then if you're not fixing it, we're going to start imposing regulation.
Yeah. A lot of what we're talking about requires a severe amount of AI literacy, right? And so I want to talk about that a little bit, because schools are changing. I have two young kids in school right now, and I'm conflicted. And so as a parent, like, what would you tell me are the best skills for me to tell my kids to learn and to help them learn? Whereas maybe it was something different, but now AI can do a lot of, writing and math. And so what would you tell me? What would you tell parents out there to have their kids focus on?
Well, one, AI literacy is going to really matter. So forbidding the use of AI is a bad mistake, right? And so engaging, whether you're a school, a parent, etc. I think getting them to engage with AI is part of how learning. Now, ChatGPT already has a learning mode, which is, I think, I don't know, might be as simple as, or study mode or whatever they call it, as don't give the answer, help them find their way to the answer. And if you do that as a meta prompt, all of a sudden, even that basic thing makes these things into amazing learning agents.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of process that we're going to want to be on. And yes, kids will figure out how to hack it, be lazy, say, just give me the answer and so on. But by the way, look, here's one of the things that I think is an inevitable part of our human future, which is the way that education is going to be assessed is essentially by examination by AI. So you're going to go into a kind of an AI booth and it's going to say, like, say, for example, you produce a paper. Great. What's going to happen is the AI is going to ask you about the paper. The way you're going to be examined is the AI is going to say, great, you produced this paper. So why did you think this? And you're going to have to say why.
Oral assessment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And you're going to have to say why. And so actually, in fact, I think the standard for learning and the ability to learn in personalized, customized ways, much higher ways, as opposed to hacking the exam, is now going to get much deeper because of AI. There may be some transition issues, but the end state is going to be much, much better for human cognition.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting because take-home homework is, there's a lot of students right now that are just using AI to write it up for them.
Yes.
And so you're saying oral assessment is probably going to be the gold standard for seeing how a student is doing. Okay.
Which we get infinite and free from AI.
Right. Right. And then I'm conflicted. I would prefer that my child's school doesn't use screens or use technology less. Yeah. But of course, I'm a technologist. I use screens all day, every day. It's literally my job. And so I'm quite conflicted on this. And I want my children to learn about artificial intelligence in the school. How do you square these two different conflicting ideas that I don't want them using screens a lot, but also I do want them using AI in the context of the classroom?
Well, if people haven't started using audio with AI, they must. It is really key. So it's very easy to actually, in fact, have both devices, but also interface points, and so where they say, it's just audio, right? So as opposed to being locked into your screen, you've got various kind of, audio format. And so that's one kind of hack that can do it. But also I think that part of it is also the design of AI, where the AI is saying, hey, we're trying to, I think we want AI that says, hey, we're trying to nudge you into productive interactions with other human beings. That's the humanist design principle we have. I gave some speeches in Italy and Bologna and Perugia on this. I actually had Reid AI give the Perugia speech in Italian and Hindi and Chinese because it's about human connection.
Yeah. I want to think about what might change your mind as an optimist. So you're an optimist now. What would you have to see? Is there concrete evidence, technical, social, political, that would just get you to say, okay, we need to pause, even if it were possible? What would that look like where you would change your optimism?
Well, the change of optimism would probably be that we can't get the right kinds of leading groups building AI to be putting most of the right values in it, right? So, for example, if you said, hey, I would get very alarmed if it was like Russia leading AI things or other kinds of entities doing that. The reason I'm not an optimist because I'm just I was born an optimist and it's it's just my character. It's a rational, reasoned optimism. It's a question of, I've spent the last, over a decade talking to a lot of the heads of the kind of both the Western democracy labs and also some of the Chinese labs. And it's okay, there is a humanist focus in many of these. Yeah. That's good. It's the shift of that would make me more alarmed. And that doesn't mean that I think it's perfect. Doesn't mean that I think there aren't commercial blind spots and things to do. But by the way that you prevent bad AI is creating good AI, not by, trying to drive down the highway at 3 miles per hour.
Yeah. In your book, Super Agency, you talk a lot about iterative deployment, which is the approach that OpenAI took. You're
Yeah.
a very early backer. Um, it, do you think there's potential for kind of a singular, catastrophic misuse of artificial intelligence? Or are we on this kind of progressive curve that it's just going to get iteratively better over time?
So there's certainly possibilities of bad use, bioterrorism, other kinds of things that you want to try to maximize or minimize the possibilities of, right? Maximize the defense against.
Yeah.
But I think iterative deployment is the best way to get there. Like the normal instinct is to say, like, for example, you say, I am building a car and I want to make sure that there's zero highway fatalities before I launch my car. You'll never launch your car. Right. You'll create this thing that's like a 5-ton monstrosity with a 10-foot steel bumper, that only goes 10 miles an hour, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, okay, that just doesn't work. You have to do iterative deployment to go, oh, that's what gets us to airbags. That's what gets us to crumple zones. That's what gets us to, and you'll have some accidents. You're trying to have just less of the really catastrophic ones.
Right. But I think the point is if you are doing iterative deployment and you make one mistake where catastrophic instances happen, then it's like maybe iterative deployment wasn't the right way. Not saying I personally disagree, but I'm just wondering how you think about it.
Well, but the problem is there's no way, some people argue, I disagree with them, to go into the future without some taking of risk. But here's so one of the mistakes that people make, and this is called existential risk, X risk, they make is they say, can you guarantee me that humans or robots by themselves won't create like a Terminator-like robot of some sort? It's like, nope, can't guarantee that neither humans nor lower accidents where robots will do that. I say, well, then shouldn't you just stop? You say, well, your intellectual mistake is looking at existential risk as a singular thing about an increase of probability that there could be a Terminator-like robot. Yep. In AI, there's that increase. But also with AI, it's the only way I can think of defending against both natural and man-made pandemic, right? That's another existential risk. I can see it really improving like issues with climate change. I could see it tracking asteroids, like identifying the asteroids like in a time that we could do something about it. So I think the existential risk portfolio gets substantially improved with AI, even when you have the Terminator risk, right? And that's the reason I'm bullish on it. And that's the reason why I'm like, no, creating AI reduces overall existential risk as we steer it, even if I cannot remove the Terminator risk to zero. And that's part of the reason I'm positive on creating AI and positive on taking that existential risk, because it decreases our overall existential risks.
Well, Reid, thank you so much for joining me. This has been awesome. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. I look forward to it and fun doing this here in Seattle.
Yeah, thank you very much.